The hymn stopped mid-note when the sanctuary doors exploded open. 3 men in black tactical gear stormed down the aisle, weapons raised, shouting for everyone to get down. 200 people dropped to the floor in terror, families shielding their children, elderly clutching prayer books. But at the piano bench in the corner, Mrs. Eleanor Hartford remained seated, her hands still poised over the keys. She wasn't frozen in fear. She was calculating. 25 years of training had just kicked in, and the quiet church pianist was about to become something else entirely. Welcome to the Silent Heroes. Before we continue this powerful story of hidden service and quiet courage, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We're growing every day, and your support helps us honor those who served in silence. Grace Methodist Church had stood on Maple Street for over a century, its red brick walls and white steeple a cornerstone of the small community of Riverside Falls. Every Sunday morning, the same ritual played out, families filing into worn wooden pews, children squirming in their Sunday best, the soft murmur of conversations about the week's events, mixing with the gentle notes of the piano. Eleanor Hartford had been part of that ritual for 15 years. She arrived every Sunday at 8:30 a.m., a full hour before the service began, to practice the hymns and prepare the old upright piano. She was 67, with silver hair always pinned back in a neat bun, wearing modest dresses in soft colors that never drew attention. To the congregation, she was simply part of the furniture. Reliable, quiet, unremarkable. Pastor Williams often joked that Mrs. Hartford was the most punctual person he'd ever met. She never missed a Sunday, never complained about the piano's occasional stuck keys, and never asked for anything in return. The church board paid her a small stipend, barely enough to cover gas money, but she never seemed to care about the compensation. What the congregation didn't know was that Eleanor Hartford had spent 25 years in the United States Air Force security forces. She had protected American embassies in Beirut during the Civil War, where she once single-handedly held off a terrorist cell for 6 hours until reinforcements arrived. She had secured diplomatic compounds in Somalia during the humanitarian crisis, coordinating evacuations under sniper fire while maintaining radio silence for operational security. Her service record included tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, where she served as a personal protection specialist for high-ranking officials, including a classified assignment protecting a CIA station chief in Kandahar. She held a top-secret clearance and had trained extensively in counterterrorism, close protection, and emergency response. Her expertise included advanced tactical shooting, explosive ordnance recognition, surveillance detection, and crisis de-escalation techniques, learned in some of the world's most dangerous conflict zones. Eleanor had been decorated multiple times for valor under fire, though most of her commendations remained classified. The Bronze Star came from an incident in Baghdad where she had neutralized 3 insurgents who had breached a security perimeter. The Purple Heart was earned during a mortar attack on a forward operating base, where she continued coordinating security operations despite shrapnel wounds to her shoulder and arm. She had retired quietly in 2008, moved to Riverside Falls to care for her aging mother, and found peace in the simple routine of Sunday morning hymns. The congregation saw a gentle widow who lived alone with her cat, Patches. They had no idea that her modest home contained a secure, gun-safe, emergency communication equipment, and the kind of tactical awareness that never truly fades. This particular Sunday morning had started like any other. Eleanor arrived early, unlocked the sanctuary with her own key. Pastor Williams trusted her completely, and began her usual routine. The sanctuary was peaceful in the early morning light, dust motes dancing in the colored streams of sunlight through the stained glass windows. She played through Amazing Grace, then How Great Thou Art, her fingers moving with the muscle memory of years of practice. By 9:30, the congregation had filled the sanctuary. The Hendersons sat in their usual spot in the third pew, baby Sarah sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. Old Mr. Peterson occupied his customary seat by the window, following along in his large print hymnal. The teenage youth group clustered together in the back rows, trying to look attentive while passing notes between them. Pastor Williams had just begun his sermon about finding strength in times of trial when the sanctuary doors burst open. The sound was like thunder in the sacred space. 3 men in black tactical clothing charged down the center aisle, their faces covered by ski masks, weapons in their hands. The leader, a tall man with cold eyes visible through his mask, fired a single shot into the ceiling. Plaster rained down as the gunshot echoed through the sanctuary. "Everyone on the ground! Now!" he shouted. "Hands where we can see them!" Chaos erupted. People screamed, diving for cover between the pews. Mrs. Henderson clutched baby Sarah to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Peterson struggled to get down from his seat, his arthritis making movement difficult. The teenagers huddled together, several of them crying. Pastor Williams raised his hands slowly. "Please," he said, his voice shaking but controlled. "These are families, children. Whatever you want, we can discuss it without violence." The leader ignored him, scanning the room with practiced efficiency. His 2 companions moved to block the exits. One positioned himself near the front door, the other covered the side entrance that led to the church offices. They moved with military precision, Eleanor noted. These weren't desperate amateurs, they were trained. "Wallets, purses, jewelry," the leader barked. "Everything valuable. Move!" But Eleanor Hartford didn't move. She remained seated at the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, her eyes fixed on the 3 men with an intensity that would have surprised anyone who knew her as the quiet church pianist. In her mind, she was conducting a rapid tactical assessment. 3 tangos, she thought, using the military terminology that came naturally after years of training. Primary threat, center aisle, armed with what appeared to be a modified AR-15. Secondary threats, both exits covered, handguns visible. Approximately 200 civilians in the target area, including at least 15 children under the age of 12. The leader noticed her lack of compliance. "You!" he shouted, pointing his weapon in her direction. "Old lady at the piano! I said get down!" Eleanor slowly turned to face him, her movements deliberate and calm. For the first time since the men had entered, she spoke. "Son," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary, "you need to reconsider what you're doing here." Her tone was gentle, but carried an authority that made several congregation members look up in surprise. This wasn't the soft-spoken Mrs. Hartford they knew. There was something different in her voice, something that commanded attention. The leader laughed harshly. "Is that right, Grandma?" "And why's that?" Eleanor stood slowly, smoothing down her blue dress. Because you're making tactical errors, she said calmly, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had commanded respect in the world's most dangerous places. You've positioned yourselves in a crossfire pattern that leaves your six exposed. You haven't accounted for the emergency exits in the choir loft. Your formation creates a fatal funnel that any trained operator would exploit. And most importantly, you've underestimated your environment and the people in it. She gestured subtly toward the windows. You also failed to conduct proper reconnaissance. If you had, you'd know that Officer Rodriguez from the local police department drives past this church every Sunday at exactly 9:15 a.m. on his way home from his night shift. The leader's eyes narrowed. What the hell are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that this is Sunday morning in a small town, Eleanor said, taking a careful step away from the piano. Which means Officer Rodriguez from the local police department is probably finishing his coffee and donut run about 2 blocks away. He always stops at Marilyn's Diner after his night shift ends at 9 a.m., and he always drives past the church on his way home. As if on cue, the sound of a police siren wailed in the distance, growing closer. The leader's head snapped toward the windows. How did you? Because, unlike you, I've been paying attention to patterns and routines for years, Eleanor interrupted. Just like I noticed that your primary weapon's safety is still engaged. Your partner by the door has a nervous tic that affects his trigger discipline. And you've all made the mistake of assuming that everyone in this room is helpless. Pastor Williams stared at her in amazement. Several congregation members had raised their heads to watch the exchange, confusion and hope warring on their faces. The leader raised his weapon, his composure cracking. Shut up! Just shut up and get on the ground. Eleanor smiled gently, the same smile she gave when helping children find the right note on the piano. I spent 25 years protecting people a lot more important than myself, in places a lot more dangerous than this. I've faced down terrorists in Beirut, insurgents in Baghdad, and warlords in Somalia. Do you really think 3 scared boys with guns are going to intimidate me in my own church? The sanctuary fell completely silent, except for the approaching sirens. Eleanor took another step forward, her movement precise and controlled. Here's what's going to happen, she continued, her voice never losing its gentle tone. You're going to set those weapons down carefully. You're going to lie face down on the floor, and you're going to wait for the police to arrive. Because if you don't, I'm going to have to stop you myself. And trust me when I say that none of us want that. The leader hesitated, his weapon wavering. For the first time since entering the sanctuary, he looked uncertain. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Eleanor reached into her purse with slow, deliberate movements. She withdrew a small leather case and flipped it open, revealing a military identification card and several commendation ribbons. Technical Sergeant Eleanor M. Hartford, she said clearly. United States Air Force Security Forces, retired. Combat veteran of Operations Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Joint Service Commendation Medal with Valor. She closed the case and looked directly at the leader. Son, I've protected embassies under siege, evacuated civilians from war zones, and faced down armed insurgents in 3 different countries. I didn't survive all of that to watch 3 punks terrorize my church family. The police sirens were getting closer. The leader looked frantically between Eleanor, his companions, and the doors. "This isn't over," he snarled, but he was already backing toward the exit. "Yes, it is," Eleanor said firmly, "and deep down, you know it." Within seconds, the three men had fled through the front doors, leaving behind a sanctuary full of shocked congregation members and one very calm church pianist. Eleanor calmly returned to her bench and placed her hands on the piano keys. As police cars screeched into the parking lot and officers rushed into the building, she began to play Amazing Grace once more, her fingers steady and sure. Pastor Williams approached her slowly, his face pale but filled with awe. "Mrs. Hartford, we had no idea." Eleanor looked up at him with the same gentle smile she'd worn every Sunday for 15 years. "Pastor, some songs are meant to be played softly," she said, "but when the moment calls for it, even an old piano can make some noise." In the days that followed, the congregation learned more about the woman who had played their hymns for so many years. Local news stations picked up the story, but Eleanor declined all interviews. She simply continued showing up every Sunday at 8:30 a.m., practicing the same hymns, preparing for the same service. But something had changed in Grace Methodist Church. The congregation looked at their pianist differently now, not with awe or fear, but with a deeper understanding of the quiet strength that had been sitting among them all along. 3 weeks later, during the children's Christmas pageant, little Amy Patterson approached the piano after the service. "Mrs. Hartford," she asked with the innocent curiosity of a 6-year-old, "were you really a soldier?" Eleanor smiled and gently corrected a crease in Amy's angel costume. "I was an airman, sweetheart, but mostly I was just someone who tried to keep people safe." "Like a guardian angel?" Amy asked. Eleanor chuckled softly. "Something like that." As the child skipped away to find her parents, Eleanor began gathering her sheet music. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, coating the church grounds in peaceful white. The sanctuary was quiet again, filled with the warm glow of Christmas lights and the lingering echoes of children's laughter. Some guardian angels, Eleanor thought to herself, wear wings and halos. Others wear sensible shoes and play hymns on Sunday morning. But when the moment comes, they all know what to do. She locked the sanctuary doors and walked home through the gentle snowfall, just another quiet retiree heading home to her cat. But Grace Methodist Church would never be the same, because sometimes the most extraordinary people are hiding in the most ordinary places, waiting for the moment when their true strength is needed most. Now I ask you, have you ever met someone like Eleanor Hartford? Someone who seemed ordinary on the surface, but carried extraordinary strength and experience? Someone who protected others without seeking recognition or praise. Share their story in the comments below, because at the Silent Heroes, we believe that the most powerful stories are often the quietest ones. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please subscribe and help us honor those who served in silence. And remember, sometimes the most important guardian angels are the ones you never see coming.